Okay, so in this lesson, I want to walk you through the case of the deformed frogs. And so here we see a picture of the life cycle of frogs. They start off as tadpoles, and then something amazing happens. They begin to grow rear legs and front legs. They lose their big tail, and they become quadrupeds. So the adult frog can hop up on land and so on, but they have to go back to the water for reproduction. Now, as it happens, some here's some pictures of the tadpoles, and that's what they look like. So they got the body here and a big old tail, and here's one that's going through metamorphosis. Here, are the two legs starting to grow there, and here we see the frog later in development. It's got the four limbs, but it still has the big tail. Now that tissue will be reused, recycled, so to speak, to make the limbs grow even bigger. Now, in the mid-90s, some curious frogs were being discovered in ponds, different locations across the country. Here we see a frog with multiple legs. Other frogs were missing rear legs. And there were enough of these abnormal frogs to get people wondering what was going on. So researchers started to investigate. And this is how you do science then. You find some phenomenon, and then you have to try to figure out what's going on in nature, what's causing these abnormalities in the frogs. So you might take a moment here to pause and answer this question. What are some possible explanations for the frog deformities? So we could take a moment and we could and write down some possibilities in the box. Okay, well, we're going to follow up on two possibilities. One we're going to call the parasite hypothesis. And in this view, that a small parasite called a trematode invades the tadpole where the legs will grow. The parasite interferes with normal development, resulting in deformities. So for this hypothesis, the idea is that there are parasites in the ponds where the frogs are hatching out, and these parasites can dig into the tadpoles, and as the parasites are in there living and reproducing, they're causing abnormalities in development. Another obvious hypothesis was that maybe pesticides in the area were causing the abnormalities. And there was a pesticide well known at the time called methoprene that was used on nearby farms. And maybe it was washing into the ponds and interfering with normal development. So for this question here, how could you test the pesticide hypothesis? Well, you might have thought that an easy way to do that would be to simply get some tadpoles, separate them into two groups, and with one group you treat the group with pesticides and the other group you don't do anything, and then you compare the frequency of deformities. Now, when that experiment was performed by researchers at the Environmental Protection Agency, they had the following results. They exposed northern leopard frogs to different levels of methoprene. High doses of methoprene killed the tadpoles, but there were no leg abnormalities. So, while there's evidence that these pesticides were toxic to the frogs, they were not causing the developmental abnormalities. And so scientists concluded that the pesticides were not the cause of these abnormalities. And so they needed further research to identify the cause. So other researchers were closely examining some of the deformed frogs, and they would find that right at the place where a leg was supposed to be but wasn't growing, they would find evidence of parasites. And even when, say, a frog was growing an extra leg, there were parasites right around the region where the extra leg was growing. And so this supported the parasite hypothesis. And so some researchers tried to do an experiment similar to the parasites, but without parasites. Instead, what they did was they took tadpoles and they implanted little beads, tiny little beads, where future legs would grow. And the implantation of those little beads did, in fact, cause deformities. later on during development. And so this established that just the physical presence of some foreign body might interfere with development of normal frogs. Now, other researchers began to do some field studies. And in one region, there were several different ponds. And what they did was they just recorded the frequency of frog deformities in different ponds in the area, and also looked at the presence of parasites in those same ponds. They also recorded whether there were any pesticides in the pond water as well. And in fact, in the research, they found no pesticides in any of the ponds. However, where they found high rates of frog deformities, they did find the presence of parasites. In each of the ponds that had a lot of frog deformities, there were parasites present. And take a look, in ponds where there were no frogs with deformities, there were no parasites present as well. So a study like this can establish a correlation between two things. In this case, because frog deformities and parasites show up together in the same ponds, scientists say that these two things, deformities and parasites, are correlated. So when two things are correlated, it just means there's a regular relationship between the two. And because deformities and parasites show up together in the same ponds, we would say there's a positive correlation. However, a correlation does not establish that the parasites are causing the deformities. And we'll study correlations in a little bit more detail. But for now, this was suggestive that parasites are involved, because wherever you find parasites, you find deformities, but it does not establish that the parasites are causing the deformities. There could be something else causing the deformities. So scientists needed to do actual experiments to establish that causal link. Okay, so another researcher decided to directly test the parasite hypothesis by doing an experiment. And this bar graph here shows the results of this experiment. And here's what they did. They had 4 groups of tadpoles. In one group, there were no parasites added to those the environment of the tadpoles. In another group, there was a low dose of parasite added to the tadpoles. In another, a medium amount of parasites, and in a fourth condition, a high amount of parasites were added to the water that the tadpoles were developing in. The y-axis is percent deformities from 0, 50 to 100, and the height of the data bars here shows us what happened in the experiment. Frogs that received a low dose of parasites, over 50% of them showed deformities. And furthermore, as the parasite load increased, the percentage of deformities also increased. And so this is strong evidence that in fact parasites are causing deformities. As the parasite load, as they call it, as the parasite load increases, the deformities are also increasing. And that would most simply be explained by the fact that the parasites are causing the deformities. Again, in the control condition, without any parasites, no deformities.